Music is everywhere in television, films, and animation. Your favorite moments from all of your favorite shows are often matched with a score or soundtrack. Yet somehow it feels rare that a good show is made about music. I would actually argue, with some exception, that media does a terrible job telling stories about musicians. And when shows or movies do succeed in telling these stories, more often than not, it feels like the music contributes more to the setting than it does the plot. But then, last year I watched Bocchi the Rock. It's a remarkably creative show, and it's very obvious the people making it are incredibly passionate about it. Because for the first time in a long time, it felt like they finally got musicians right. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about why musicians love Bocchi the Rock. Some important context I should probably include is that right now my primary form of income is music. I play multiple instruments and I'm a solo recording artist that's involved in the creative process from beginning to end. So when I make the claim that I'm a professional musician, it's not to imply that I'm a great musician or that I know better than other musicians, but I do think I have a valid voice when it comes to why musicians love Bocchi the Rock as much as they do. So today I'm going to talk about two major parts of Bocchi the Rock. First, what makes it such a special show, and second, how it engages in music and understands musicians. I recently started watching a show called Given, another popular anime that's pretty well received following high school musicians. And while the show has been good in the first couple episodes, I was shocked at the immediate difference in quality when it came to representing musicianship. Mostly because this show isn't doing a bad job, but in comparison to Bocchi the Rock, it's noticeably worse. It feels more on par with the way musicianship has been classically represented, but checking out this show did absolutely reinforce my perspective surrounding Bocchi the Rock. It's just better. But I do think Bocchi the Rock does something that I very rarely see in media, something that's hard to put your finger on, but feels so apparent when you see it. I'm also not sure that Bocchi the Rock is the only good show to do this. I've heard very good things about Kids on the Slope, and I'm sure there are other good shows that I haven't heard of that come to mind for some of you watching the video now. But now that I've acknowledged that, I want to take a little bit of time to focus on what makes Bocchi the Rock so special to me. If you compare Bocchi the Rock's source material to the anime, you'll notice a huge difference. What was originally a very cute and funny manga has now become a show with more depth than you would expect. And it's still very cute and very funny, because the creators of the anime hold the source material in very high regard while also not being afraid to make changes. It also helps that those changes feel very true to the source. Phenom Sage, a great YouTuber who talks about anime, has a remarkable video talking about Bocchi the Rock. He argues a very similar point, comparing the source material in the manga and the differences between the two. And he also deep dives on the special X factor Bocchi the Rock seems to bring to the table, its creativity. Anyone who's seen Bocchi the Rock will point out all the cool things they did to represent exaggerated fun moments. For example, Phenom the Sage pointed out the zoetrope sequence, multiple awesome jumps into different animation styles and 3D modeling, or the literal figurines that are being moved by hands in black gloves. The creativity Bocchi the Rock expresses is incredible. But something that I'm really appreciative that Bocchi the Rock approached that always makes a show more manageable for me to consume as a young adult is creating characters that feel authentically like teenagers, and then respecting those characters, whether or not it's their validity in their perspectives or experiences, or the fact that there's way less over-sexualization that's so pervasive in anime. And it feels a lot like some of the best Pixar films, where in one hand I'm obviously not the target audience, but it doesn't feel like the show is compromising on the ability to appeal to a large range of people because it's just that good. Because the characters are super well written, and the conflict, while not being very high stakes, is very compelling. Because for Bocchi the Rock, the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, which is saying something because the parts are already so strong. But the biggest thing that sold me on Bocchi the Rock, the reason I'm making this video, is because it finally felt like they understood musicians. In a previous video I made talking about iconic musical moments in anime, I talked about one scene from Bocchi the Rock. But before I get to that scene, I want to talk about what prefaced it. There's been this really cool rock revival in Japan. The US has such a widespread effect on global culture when it comes to music and film, and often you'll see that influence, but also as often you won't. There's a lot of great music made all over the world. And the Japanese rock revival is a perfect example of something that has outgrown its influence. And as a musician, not only is it very good, but it's also really interesting to think about. And Bocchi the Rock is built all around that premise. And the music for Bocchi the Rock was written by prominent Japanese artists. artists, like Kanaboom, Asian Kung Fu Generation, Zack, and the Peggies are all behind the music in Bocchi the Rock. So the music in this show is really good, which means you need to make your characters good musicians. Which leads nicely to my first point. Music is more than innate skill. It's a pet peeve of mine when people treat musical skill as a God-given talent that required no work. I'm not here to debate whether or not people have more inclination towards music or pick it up faster, but every talented musician I've ever met has put in huge amounts of time and effort into learning the craft. It frustrates me when people take complex things that took a lot of effort and time and simplify them to innate skills or talents. It undermines the fact that hard work is the foundation of almost any musical skill. But that's not the case in Bocchi the Rock. They don't sell Bocchi as a prodigy or a musical genius, just someone that's put a lot of time and effort into it because it piqued her interest. Which leads to another point I wanted to make. Music in Bocchi the Rock serves the plot consistently. It's not there as just filler or shimmer, it is substantial. What differentiates Bocchi the Rock from other shows about music is the fact that the music itself is central to her character. Her social anxiety gets in the way of her ability to connect with people, and she desperately wants that. So when she saw musicians step into the spotlight despite being introverts, she decided she wanted to be one too. While Bocchi the Rock is a story about music, it's also a story about a young girl who is dealing with intense social anxiety. As a 25-year-old man who's had a below average amount of social anxiety, I am not the target audience for this show. Part of the testament as to why this show is so good is the way it could appeal to me, the way I still enjoyed her and her friend's story. And what makes the music in this show so good, outside of just the quality and the way they navigated it, is the fact that it works perfectly for that case. It tells a story. It's part of the story. It's not just a setting piece. There is passion that shines through and delicateness in the way that this story is told. And ultimately, it's just beautiful. Now, Bocchi the Rock is primarily a comedy, but it is also a very compelling drama, where we see characters confront their fears, push themselves outside of their comfort zone, and strive to achieve their goals. This show is beautiful and has a magnitude to it that is deceptive because most of the time it's just silly, wholesome, and fun. It's also just really good. They do this thing in the show that I've never really seen done right. It's a really hard thing to do, which is to represent musicians underperforming without making it sound too bad or disrupting my suspension of disbelief. How do you effectively showcase a bunch of talented musicians who are incredibly anxious for a performance underperforming? A drummer trying to keep everyone in sync, the bass player playing a little bit too stiff, a lack of fluidity in the guitar. Because there's an anxiety that comes with live performance that can really get in the way of you just getting into flow state, playing the way you know you can. Especially when you're playing with a group and feeding off of one another and working together, where musicians aren't making obvious mistakes but collectively are struggling to mesh properly. Well, Bocchi the Rock did it really well, and it set up one of the best scenes in the show. A quick spoiler warning. It's time for me to talk about a key moment in this show. However, if you're not too bothered by it, I don't think that this spoiler will ruin much for you, because this show isn't really about the major plot points being hit or twists, it's more about the execution. The biggest moment in Bocchi the Rock for me was her solo, where everything comes together, and it's actually something I think I have seen happen before, where people let go of their nerves, embrace their hours and hours of practicing, and really commit to the performance. What makes this scene so significant is this represents all of the growth Bocchi has been working for. It's not absolute. She will continue to have social and performance anxiety. Nothing drastic will necessarily change, but it's the start of a melting point. Tangible, noticeable growth is apparent in an action, and it's a triumphant one at that. And not only does this scene work perfectly for the story and characters, but the music is remarkable. The animation is incredibly accurate. And the moment feels like a perfect exclamation point to a already remarkable series. And also, it really helps that the music is so freaking good. If you haven't watched Bocchi the Rock, I'd really suggest it, especially if you're a musician. Thank you.